Welcome to the Andy Staples Show. It's an NIL edition, and usually that means you're going to sleep. But David Ubben wrote an NIL story that people actually paid attention to and read. And they're like, holy cow, look at that.
Because it's not an NIL story, Andy. It's a recruiting story.
That's right.
Yes.
It is actually kind of this is the new world. Get used to it. Get over it story. The number that pops off the page is $10 million because you said you followed one of these NIL collectives. This is one that works with Tennessee, or
they don't work with Tennessee. Andy.
No. All right, works around Tennessee.
The plausible deniability leans heavily on precise language.
Well, I feel like I need to know exactly what every state law's exact wording is.
Yeah, it's crazy, man.
Yeah. So this is a Tennessee-centric one.
Yeah.
We've profiled the one that works with Florida. We've profiled the one that works with Texas. There's a lot of these, but basically you wrote that the good ones are going to be spending about $10 million a year
this year
on deals for players this year.
That number is going to go up in the very near future.
Oh yeah. And you're looking at it and going, oh my gosh, that's insane. or you can look at it like, wait, so for an entire elite college football team, it only costs the same as a half-decent veteran right tackle in the NFL?
Well, one class, I suppose, right? And
one, but you only get that guy for 1 year for $10 million.
Well, yeah, I guess maybe. Yeah, that's probably about right. If you're talking about rolling deals over 4 years, possibly. Yeah, that's probably about right. Yeah, I guess you're right. So, yeah, I mean, the math is inexact at this point, because there's not set prices. It's all about leverage. And the other thing too, Andy, we were talking about this as we were reporting the story. There's nothing to FOIA here. So the official numbers are going to be, I mean, we've seen it already through the first 7 months of NIL. The official numbers are very hard to track down because they're not public. We're used to filing open records requests and getting numbers. That's why you see coaching salaries, and we know all that, because those are usually by public universities. This is private citizens and private companies doing business together, and they have no obligation to make those numbers public.
Right. Because we don't know how much Nike pays LeBron.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same thing. It's interesting to me, though, because there is a benefit and a harm in the numbers being announced, not necessarily the real numbers, just the numbers that are announced. Like, it was not an accident that Nick Saban said Bryce Young could make X number of dollars when he was talking to a bunch of Texas high school football coaches, because that's basically saying, hey, if you come to Alabama, you got a chance to make some dough.
Yeah.
Also, not an accident that Jimbo Fisher got really mad that somebody said they're spending $25 to $30 million on this class, because they're not, because you don't want a member of the class going, wait a second, who's getting all this money if I'm not?
Dare I say, Andy, yet.
Right. Right.
Because I think
that number may be coming.
I think that's kind of what part of the crux of the piece is, that this is very early. And I think Tennessee, from everything that we've gathered and talked to people in the space, is pretty ahead of it right now, in part because they have hungry fans who are dying to be better at football. And they have a group in Inspire who has a history background in sports agency and sports marketing. They know this space. Some of these collectives, they vary wildly in organization,
they're just learning
resources.
As they go.
Some are just guys. Some are just a press release. Some are just a website that's pretty rudimentary. Tennessee is pretty ahead here, but by the end of the year, I think you're going to have a bunch of sort of warring factions, and these bidding wars are going to get real serious because it's all legal, and there's no reason not to sort of, if you're a 5-star or a kid that multiple schools really need as the jewel of your class, well, that's called leverage, Andy, and that's called capitalism, which is a 4-letter word in college sports.
So you are saying, David, that someone the market values could be worth more than someone the market values less.
It's possible.
What a shocking concept. I'm sure nobody listening to this show has ever used that in a negotiation with their own employer.
No, definitely not. Our listeners are better than that, Andy, than to expect to try and somehow finagle more money to provide for their families out of these benevolent big companies, Andy, that they're working for, that need that money for who knows what, Andy. It's more important that the companies and organizations are well funded than
Yes.
citizens have money. I think we can all agree that that's very obvious.
So I was communicating with somebody from a different school about this topic over the weekend, and
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those that's trying to get organized. And 10 million. This is a Power 5 type school. 10 million was the number that was thrown out. That basically they feel like that would be a good number per year to be competitive if they wanted to be competitive, and there might be a little more here and there depending on the recruiting class, but I mean, when you think about the economy of scale here, that's actually still kind of a bargain
I agree with you.
for the
This is again.
players.
This is why there's so much room to grow, because
Yeah.
right now, what Spire and I wrote about this in the piece at the Athletic. If you guys want to check it out, this is what they're dealing with: is that they go talk to donors who, you have big time donors that have some change to spare. They can maybe find 6 to 7 digits in their couch cushions, and then you have the fans that are divvying up, that say, "I want to contribute to this. I want to help, and I want to give $20 a month." Well, Andy, 500 fans giving $20 a month in a year, that's $100,000. 500 fans is not very many fans. And
Yeah.
most places in the SEC have more than that might be willing to give more than $20
Well,
a month.
and the thing is, people say, "Well, what's the value in this?" Well, they want to help the team win,
Exactly.
and you can give money to the school, and their way to help the team win might be put a waterfall in the training room, or you
Mm-hmm.
could just have the athlete get the money, and it's the athlete that you want getting the money. I think that's a little more direct path.
This is why
So,
nobody does facility tours when they're picking NFL free agency spots, Andy.
right. The
Talking
Bengals
to
sign free agents. That's all you need to know is the Bengals sign free agents that other teams want because they can pay
yes.
them more money. They do not have nicer facilities. In fact, they don't even have an indoor. That may have come up once or twice last week.
Yes, exactly. But anyway, Andy, so what they're dealing with, and I think this is what every collective is going to battle over the next year, is one, getting donors to understand and trust them, Andy. Trust is huge in this. That these aren't just sort of, well, when I give you your money, are we going to actually see results? Trust is huge, and that has to be earned over time. But getting them to understand the stakes, because a lot of donors and business owners, Andy, they're busy guys or women. They don't necessarily understand what's going on in college sports. They give their donation to the school, they show up for their season tickets in their box or whatever, and that's sort of it. Well, now you got to understand, hey, if we don't have money to fund these collectives, it's going to be hard to amass talent in the years to come. And that's part of what they do, and what every collective is going to have to do is make sure that people with money understand that.
And I can imagine some of these folks that are getting the pitch. They're like, wait, this is legal now?
Yeah,
And
legitimately, this is a real thing that not
yeah,
everyone gets this. Andy, I don't understand them either, but apparently there are people that live in the United States that don't read about and pay attention to college football 365 days a year. I don't understand it, but
not the
apparently these
listeners
people
of this
exist.
show, but yes, it's a pretty big group that just sort of
Yeah.
drops in once the season starts, and they're like, "Oh, okay, this is going on now." But
Yeah.
it is amazing to me. Now, what's funny is like you've got like the Pac-12 commissioner George Kliavkoff calling it legalized cheating. I don't know how to break this to you.
That's a
But
oxymoron.
but maybe the guy who used to work for the casino should understand that once it's legal, it ain't cheating anymore. So,
Exactly.
like, used to be when you worked for MGM, for most of the time that George Kliavkoff worked for MGM, the only place you could really bet on sports was Las Vegas.
Mhm.
Now you can bet on sports in like half of America. It's no longer illegal.
Yeah.
It is therefore okay. So we're just gonna have to get over this. It's cheating. And I've seen like Darren Ravel is always like, it's cheating. No,
And Andy, here's where I land on this too.
I
Like,
think
just big
I
picture.
think it was sold to idiots the wrong way. I think that's what happened. It was
That might be true.
they
Mhm.
had to sell it to stupid people. And so they said, well, we're going to create these guardrails, and you can't make it where somebody's getting money to go to a certain school. Well, of course that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Like,
And I look, I keep trying to point people to this, right? The people that want to get mad about this. Like, these rules are meant, and they were bad. Like, I don't know how many times I can tell you,
they
like,
were denying people a basic
it
economic
was
right, and now they're not.
legitimately exploitative,
Yeah.
bad, Like,
Yeah.
Stu Mandel, our colleague, and I were talking about this over the earlier this week. If you were building college sports from scratch, okay, and you were faced with two options, the way college football was 5 to 10 years ago, where all the money is funneled to a select amount of coaches and getting a fresh paint job on the team facility and upgrades to the stadium, while the players get low level degrees in a lot of cases that aren't worth as much as people like to pretend they are, or the current situation, which people are decrying as, oh, this is ruining it, I'm out. We'll see you in September, by the way.
You're not out. We've seen the ratings.
The previous system is the evil one, guys. I don't know how to tell you. Just because the rules said it was right, those were bad rules. I don't know how to tell you that if you don't get that already.
There's a subset of people who just whatever the rules are, that's sacred to them.
Some rules are bad.
They never question that maybe the rules could be dumb. So that's where I think we are. I think that group is slowing, and the way that I've always said it is, Andy, I don't think there's that much opposition to NIL, discomfort, and that's kind of silly. Well, I think people will get over it, and I think people are too. Getting over it faster than we realized they would. Yeah. And it's interesting because you go back to the Supreme Court decision, Brett Kavanaugh in the just scorching takedown of the NCAA. This is the one where he kind of went out on his own. He's like, nobody goes to a restaurant and says, I like this place better because the waiters are paid less. Like,
yes,
nobody does that.
Yeah.
Now they might subconsciously do it because the prices are cheaper, the employees are paid less, blah, 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 blah. And they feel like they're getting more value because they're paying less money. But nobody says these employees are making less and therefore I enjoy it more. Like, so.
Yeah. And again, these same people, Andy, that are opposing this are usually big time capitalists. And again, we're seeing the free market work here. This is what's happening. Who would have known, Andy? It's almost like people like you and me have been screaming for 10 or 15 years that athletes have real value. Yes. I've been floored that there's a market once that they're out here, that people pay money for their services. That's crazy.
There have been multiple businesses, very successful businesses, built on ranking the recruits that college football teams sign. If that's not proof of a market, I don't know what is.
I think we're standing at 3 that are employed. I mean, how many employees do 24/7 Rivals and RIP Scout and On3 now have? I mean, certainly in the hundreds, all of them, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, but here, okay, I am fascinated by watching this thing find its level. Like this is, you're right, it is a market, and any new market, because this market has been constrained, and now it is. I don't think it's completely free, but it is much less constrained.
It's growing, and the resources are currently hitting Terry, and they're flowing into now.
Right. So now we'll figure out, and it's going to be interesting to watch because everybody's worried about recruits getting the money. I think the longer it goes, the fewer recruits are going to actually get something up front or get a lot up front because it's a terrible investment. But somebody who blows up in their first couple games as a freshman or as a redshirt freshman, that person is going to get deluged with stuff.
Yeah, it's possible. But Andy, I think it goes into, it's the same argument as if you're going to donate to an athletic department. Well, you've been putting that money there anyway. And it goes into the, does Uncle Sam get this? Especially if you're a big time money.
I'd rather
Uncle Sam get this, or does
Uncle Sam?
Does your favorite program get this?
Yeah.
And so investment maybe, but I think certainly I think we can all agree a cornerback and a 5-star edge rusher that's a top 50 recruit, or even Andy, if you're at Purdue or somewhere, a 3-star quarterback that has some offers from bigger places is a more valuable investment and asset to a program than a set of $110,000 lockers.
I would agree. I would agree. But this is what I've always said about all of this stuff. The stuff they've built, they had to spend the money on something.
Exactly.
Like
I've been joking about this all week, but again,
even if you're terrible at football,
people that weren't paying attention, it's a nonprofit with the biggest quotation marks in the history of human like existence. It's just,
Yeah.
and again, if you aren't like us, Andy, and you don't have your nose pressed up against the glass all the time, you don't sometimes see that. You see the headline, 3 programs made money. Well, you kind of be around to know how much our whole thing is just ridiculous, and it's funny money that the math is cooked and all these things. So again, there's going to be some adjustments happening. I think that the interesting thing for me, Andy, is watching the tension in some places, because Spire's had good experiences with Tennessee when they go to donors and are talking and saying, hey, we'd like some of your money. And sometimes that's in addition to what they're already giving the school, but not always. And that's not always going to be the case. And there's 130 programs, and Tennessee has been proactive with them in saying, that's okay. We're okay with that. We think if the program's better, we'll get that back eventually. Well, there's 130 programs, Andy. Not everybody's going to feel that way, but these collectives are going to be integral. And it's going to get uncomfortable and sticky in a lot of places in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and that's going to be interesting to see who gets on board and who doesn't.
Yeah.
It also could mean, I don't know this, and I think the programs that have always been serious about football will embrace this. They want to win.
Your fans are going to demand it.
Somebody new may be able to jump in as somebody who was kind of on the outside of that level, and but had a lot of resources. Maybe they say, I don't know if this is for us. And some other schools like, hell yeah, let's do it. And
yeah, exactly.
So you may see some shifting competitively of who's good and who's not.
Yeah, I think, right now, I think we're seeing hungry programs lean on this a lot. Nebraska, Tennessee are some of the people that are right now that are leaders in that space. Alabama doesn't have a public NIL collective right now, Andy. I'm sure that's going to change in the very near future. But I think part of it is because things have been going pretty good for them. And they don't have fans beating down the door saying, we're not going to take it anymore. We got to change.
But Alabama's also an old line SEC program. And if somebody
they'll
said,
get
hey,
there.
Let's get this sucker cranked up, I bet they could have it done.
They'll be fine.
They
so I think the
idea up. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're ahead of the game now. People are going to catch up. What can that do? Do I think that these collectives being ahead right now means that you're going to be competing for national championships if you're Tennessee or Nebraska and signing top 5 classes in 23 and 24? Probably not. But if you can have a little bit more money than everybody else, maybe instead of a top 15 class, you got a top 10 class. I think that's a real possibility. Well, and again, I think the thing that we're looking at, and I wrote about in this piece a little bit, is almost not even as much the upside as much as the necessity. Because if you don't have this and you've been signing top 15 classes and all of a sudden you say, we're not on board, well, welcome to the top 30.
Right. Somebody who is on board is going to take your spot. 100%. The Nebraska thing's interesting, though, because you look at we've made a lot of the Big Ten score differential this past year, where it's basically they basically scored the same number of points that they allowed in Big Ten play, but they went 1-8. So they were just this close in a bunch of games. What if they had 1 or 2 more difference maker type players?
Yeah.
We're talking about a totally different season.
Absolutely. And I think, again, I think fans see that. I was talking to the Spire guys this week. I think, there's a lot of fans, whether they're donors, whether they're mid-level people that have, I can give, $200 a month, $20 a month, whatever. They may not be as invested in the facilities and all that other thing, but they watch the games on Saturday and they say, why is our quarterback throwing all these picks? Why is our linebacker missing all these tackles? I want to get better players. I'm getting in on these guys. I'm tired of watching this. And that is a powerful motivator. And I think, it's funny, these places, when you're winning, you hear excitement, but I almost wonder if these places, these collectives, they might see some boosts in donations after losses, Andy. I don't know how you do that, but I think that's kind of a possibility.
It is interesting. And I think they will work very similarly to how it worked underground.
Yeah.
Before all this. I mean, let's not be naive here. There's been money flowing to recruits at different places for years to get them to come to certain schools. And it wasn't organized all that differently. It was just much more loosely and done in cash. And now Andy, it doesn't have to be.
When you compare the black market to the current market, the money is going up. I mean, I have heard that it is basically doubled, tripled, quadrupled because you can negotiate, and nobody's going to do that and be afraid of someone blowing the whistle because there's not a whistle to blow. And that
Right.
you might have a couple people that are negotiating, but you always had to worry, Andy, if you rub somebody the wrong way, they can blow up your whole spot. And
Oh yeah,
now that's not
on
going to
both
happen.
sides of the
Absolutely.
transaction.
Absolutely. And that's not the case now. Now, if you want to aggressively negotiate, you can, and that's what it is. And
Yep.
I think when that happens and you can do that without fear, that money is going to start to flow. And as more people get involved and understand the stakes, which I think are key, that money's only going to grow.
But there will be a stopping point because it is a market. Like at a
Eventually.
certain point, somebody's going to say, you aren't worth that.
Yeah.
And the player's going to have to be like, okay.
Yeah.
I see
It'll
what you're
even out
saying.
eventually. It's not 10 million. I don't think 10 million is enough. Is 20 to 25 maybe? I don't know. I think we'll see. I
I
feel
think
pretty confident 10 million is not going to get it done in 5 years.
so. The NFL, its players receive roughly 50%, a little slightly less than 50% of football revenue
Mm-hmm.
as part of their CBA. Uh, if that were the case in college, I'm trying to, because obviously economies of scale, again, Power Five, like SEC and Big Ten programs, they make different
Yeah,
money
some of them were
than,
like 140, 130
yeah,
million, 120
yeah.
million, and then you get to the
So,
group 5 and it's in the mid 8 digits in a lot of places.
right. So I'm not exactly sure what percentage we're talking about. It's going to be lower than the NFL. Would be
Mm-hmm.
my guess. It's certainly going to lower number than the NFL. I bet it's a lower percentage than the NFL too. And I mean, I think of it ultimately, this will push them to make them employees, to collectively bargain, all that stuff, because I don't think they like the unknowns of all this.
I agree
But
with you. I think it's
it
heading
is
there.
it is a fascinating little, like, there are going to be econ majors that write so many papers on this period because it's, I mean, I wish we had an econ major here who could, because I'm sure they could spout off examples of markets that were suddenly uncapped and then
Well,
exploded, and
is
how
the
they,
last one we've seen like weed in Colorado and on the West Coast? Would that be the last time we've seen it where there's a black market and then all of a sudden it's all
maybe, but
sort of
that is
legal?
so heavily regulated and taxed
Yeah, you might be
still.
right.
I don't know that
I don't
it's
know. I
it's
mean, again, I'm
necessarily.
not very good at econ. That's not a strength of mine, so I wouldn't be the best person. But maybe that's an episode. That's a future Andy Staples show episode, Andy. That's what
It's
that
what's
is.
me or Freakonomics. Maybe I combine with Freakonomics
That's
or
not a
Planet
bad
Money.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, because it is amazing to me. I like, because I want to see what it does, and I do
Hmm.
think there are gonna be several years before they figure out what exactly they want to ultimately do about this,
Yeah.
and come up with a more stable system, because it does feel pretty unstable right now. But
I think portal windows are coming. Beyond
mhm,
that, as far as restrictions and guidelines, I wouldn't bet on a whole lot, especially in the
there's
money aspect of it. I think portal
there's not
windows
much
are
they
coming.
can do. Right? There's not much.
Exactly.
You can put portal windows in there, because if you say you can't enter the portal between this date and this date, you're still not keeping anyone from moving. Like,
Yeah.
as long as they can move between
Especially
seasons, they're
when they're going
fine.
to be built around the academic calendar. It's going to be like late November to January,
Yeah.
another window in like April to July or whatever.
Yeah,
So you'll be
it's
fine.
going to make sense, and
Hmm.
nobody who really wants to go to another school is going to be kept from going to another school.
Yes.
So that you don't have to worry about that. The money stuff, the Supreme Court ruling, and it's hard to explain to folks who don't follow this super closely, but the Supreme Court ruling didn't actually have anything to do with this, but had everything to do with this. If
Yeah.
that makes sense, like,
Yeah. It basically said
basically.
all of college sports, this is messed up. Y'all can't do this.
Right, right. Because the case that was before the court was about educational benefits, what schools could give athletes
Mhm.
relative to their educational experience in terms of a dollar amount. It had nothing to do with just paying them to play. But basically, what the ruling says, Kavanaugh in not many words, and Gorsuch in, reading between the lines, is any of your rules that get brought before us, we're going to smack down. So you're going to have to
NCAA
come to
lost
new
that
rules.
case 9-0, Andy. They don't
Yes.
have. It's not close.
Yeah.
In college football terms, it's a bye game.
Yeah.
This was a butt kicking.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing. The creative people who figure it out are going to do very well for themselves
Yeah.
in college sports, because it is a matter of sort of figuring out what the new world is going to be, and then figuring out how to. And here's the thing: The coaches are still going to make a bunch of money. The ADs are still going to make a bunch of money. So people are still going to give money to schools because they like to see names on buildings. They like, people want their names on buildings. That won't change. But it might change how much, like what percentage is given to the athletic department and what percentage
and
goes
again,
to
Andy,
a collective.
I keep pointing back to for the alarmists who are like, so they're going to take money away from the university and the athletic department and give it to kids. Again, zoom out of the NCAA mode and
They were spending it in very dumb ways.
Explain to me how that's a societal negative when their locker costs $10,000 and you're trying to tell me that their $40,000 interdisciplinary studies degree is worth all of the $150 million that they're helping produce. Please explain that to me. So
right. They were spending it foolishly because they had to spend it because they're not allowed to show a profit
to become a big quotation marks nonprofit. Yes,
it'd be like if we didn't put any money in our 401ks every year and just like tore out a room of our house and rebuilt it every single year because we have to spend the money.
Pretty much. And so I just keep coming back to. It's quite a time to be covering this sport because in the last year and a half, the sport has changed more than it has, I would argue, in a century. And it is wild to witness. But it's great to see this new world because, Andy, you watch the big machinations of this sport, and you kind of have to hold your nose a lot of the time, especially in the last decade. And as money has exploded and you see it's becoming more and more exploitative. And to see the sport get less exploitative and have to hold your nose a little bit less at the entire enterprise as you cover it and you love the sport itself, it's been refreshing for me in the last year to be able to see
I think
less
there's a lot of us who feel that way, but I know there are a lot of people who want what they grew up with and think what they grew up with is somehow pure.
Yeah. And and the economic model made sense in the 70s and 80s. This was a fair enterprise back then. It's not like money. It's always been like this. It was good. And then you had Oklahoma going to the Supreme Court and winning Jordan. That case in 1984, Andy, am I correct?
84.
That sort of started this. The Big Ten wasn't always signing away their TV rights for billions of dollars every year. This is a recent 20, 30-year development that has blown up. And that is when the economic model changed. And it became, these guys are running their bodies ragged and making nothing while everyone else is, coaches are making $10 million.
It's not nothing. Because I know
that's fair. Let's not go.
I'd have given anything for a scholarship, blah, 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 blah.
That's fine.
It's
not
worth
nothing, something, but it's not.
But they didn't get a raise.
Yes.
Everybody else got massive raises and they got zero raises if we're talking from a percentage standpoint. Because you say, oh, tuition went up. That's not getting a raise.
Yeah.
that's a cost of living adjustment.
Yes, pretty much. So let's not say nothing because, obviously degrees are something. But then, of course, if you have a close examination of how, in many cases, college athletes are funneled into degrees aren't always worth what everyone else's degrees can be worth. There are some issues with that as well that can hamstring people in the future. And sure, on some level, athletes are responsible to take their own education seriously, but you have a lot of pressure in some cases. Oh, yeah. Well, this major's easier. Well, that's cool. I can get through school easier. I can focus on football because obviously I'm going to go to the NFL. And then the NFL doesn't work and you don't have a degree that's worth enough.
Mind-blowing thing for me, David, I'm a freshman in college and I'm a walk-on. And so and when I made my first semester schedule, I wasn't even on the team yet. So like I had gone through and this is pre-internet. So you're calling the number and punching in the numbers of the classes you want. And like I had it all mapped out and everything.
This sounds terrible, by the way.
I had done the same thing for I'd done the same thing for my second semester, even though I was on the team. I had no idea I could have gone to the academic advisors and just said, I want these classes. Yeah. But I'm on the plane back from the Sugar Bowl. And they're handing out these papers to the other guys. And I'm like, what's going on here? It was their class schedules. Like I had 2 months earlier, the second I was allowed to sign up for classes, hand-picked all the classes. I had my course catalog out. And I'm like, if I can't get this one, I'm going to get this one. And then they're like, oh, I'm taking this. Oh, I'm like, how do you not know what you're taking?
Yeah, and that's where we get into the uncomfortable position of how much is their personal responsibility versus like lack of education, right? Of not knowing, okay, this is how this is supposed to work, and all these
Right.
things. This is
And I guarantee you nobody told them,
yes.
and maybe nobody wanted to tell them,
That's where
"Hey, guys,
this is gets a little
you can
yucky.
yeah, you can have a little more agency in this than just take the piece of paper they give you and
Yes.
that's what you do." So that's the part that, you know, when people say, "Well, they get a scholarship." No, no, no. They're still serving a purpose. They are providing a service for the school that is more valuable than the average student is
Yeah.
providing the school.
Andy, I feel I, I feel almost condescending at times when people try to defend the old model or anything like that, because my instinct, and it's just that they just didn't pay close enough attention to what was going on. And that's where I go every single time. The people that are saying, well, no, this is, the old, it was fine. I'm like, did you really look at it? Did you really look
But
at it?
they
It's hard for me to
didn't.
take it seriously.
They didn't, and I don't listen. I'm not going to kill them over that
Yeah.
because they just want to enjoy their sports. It's not their job. Like it's
Yeah.
our job to follow this stuff and study this stuff. It's not their job. So they're not looking at it from that point of view. They just want to watch the games. But I also think this is the reason that not so many people are going to stop liking this because of all
Yeah.
this stuff.
Especially in
If the
places that care
games
about college football.
Right. If the game
Saturday
shows up
afternoon,
on your
yeah.
TV on Saturday in September,
You're not going to turn
you're
it off and go
good.
do lawn work. You're not going to do that. It's just not going to
Yep.
happen. Again, I feel the same way, Andy. For all the stuff, whatever happens in the off season that we write about, from stupid stuff like satellite camps to NIL and the transfer portal and all this stuff that's annoying and people complain about and all that stuff. When you're playing your rival in October and it's on ESPN at 7 p.m., you're going to be either in the stadium or you're going to be watching, and you can scream and yell and say you're not, but you are. So that's fine.
And you're going to be screaming and yelling if your collective isn't getting the job done, because your collective better be doing it, or on that Saturday night at 7:30, things are going to get ugly for your team.
Exactly. Embrace it. Adapt or die, Andy. I mean, the thing is, this has been true in offensive football. I've compared these collectives to the forward pass because I think it's really true. Adapt or die. This is what it is. You cannot like
1913 Notre Dame, not 1913 Army.
Yeah, nobody's yelling for a coach that throws the ball 10 times a game anymore, Andy, because that's an old way of playing football that's not effective anymore. And the old way of recruiting is not effective anymore. It happened just a lot faster. So again, Andy, the thesis, we should make this the episode title, quite honestly. Adapt or die, because that's what collectives are right now.
That's exactly
you can
right.
Yell about it, you can complain, you can say I'm not comfortable with it. Okay, that's fine. But if you don't adapt, your program is going to suffer.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you your take on this. This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I don't know the answer to it. Is this a better time for all of this because it's all been, the Band-Aid was completely ripped off, and it was completely ripped off at a time when something completely outside everyone's control, the pandemic, was wreaking havoc elsewhere? Did that kind of provide a little more open-mindedness to be like, you know what? Stuff's going to change. Stuff happens. Let's just roll with this.
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say because we only have the data that we have, which is kind of what you said, is that all this happened amid that. And so we don't really know kind of what would have happened if things were more normal when all this change was happening. I really don't know. My instinct is probably not. I think the same people that were in favor of it would still be in favor of it. And the same people that I'm hesitant to even say oppose. Instead, I would just say slow to realize how important things are, whether that is the transfer portal or whether that is NIL or all of those things that have changed the sport or the expanded playoff or whatever. So that's kind of my instinct, is that I don't know that it would have changed the fault lines of disagreement or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. It's an interesting question. I mean, we've all been living a very different existence. Things can feel a little bit more normal in the South than it does. I was in LA for vacation. It feels like you're in another country when you're there. It's just very, very different. Or getting on a plane still feels very different. Like it's still a different era of American life in a lot of ways. I don't have kids, but masking in schools obviously is a big deal. So this is not really, we're not used to things, and I don't know, Andy. It's an interesting question. Maybe we should pose it to the listener. I'd be curious what they have to say.
I am fascinated. Like, can you deal with this better because our whole lives got turned upside down, and this feels like
not that big. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about it that way, of just how acutely all of our lives changed for so long that this feels like not as big of a change. You may be onto something there. I wouldn't think of it through that prism.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see, because I know a lot of people have. Well, I don't say a lot of people, because honestly, the people who communicate with us about college football on Twitter are as psychotic about it as we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that doesn't represent the average fan. The average fan is the person who probably isn't listening to this show because they're not that much of a psycho.
Yeah.
We love you, psycho. We love you, psychos, by the way.
The psychos are great. They're my favorite.
But they're the ones that they're tuning in at noon on the first Saturday in September and going, all right, let's do this.
How's our team looking this year? Yeah.
Yeah.
I get that all the time. Like, Andy, if I'm out or somewhere and somebody recognizes me, I get, how are they going to look this year? And it's like, the psychos aren't asking me how they're going to look. Psychos are asking, how's that 4-star that we got? Is he going to be on second or third string? It's like, that's what the psychos are asking. Yeah. The casuals are asking me, how many games are they going to win this year? The psychos already know they know, Andy, they're going to win 11 games. The only question is, which of the freshmen are going to have 1,200 and which one's going to have 1,500 yards?
Exactly. God, we love you people. We love you so much. Please don't ever change. But yeah, I'm fascinated by all of this. I really want to see where it goes. I think probably where it's headed is some sort of more organized structure that looks different than what we grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
But on Saturday at noon and 3:30 and 8 o'clock,
it's gonna look the same.
Will still be quite a spectacle. So
yes. And we'll be there, Andy. I'm excited about it. It's gonna be a fun season, and we got a long off season ahead with lots of change and portal exits and entrances, and a lot of money on the board, a lot of money flowing no longer in the black market, but in the free market. So let's do it.
Yeah. And while you're at it, just give us some. Hey, speaking of the free market.
Oh, one of the great markets.
If you want to read this amazing story that David Ubben wrote that was published on Tuesday that everyone's talking about, and you're like, wait, I need to read this so I can join the conversation. theathletic.com/Andy Staples. $1 per month for your first 6 months.
That's a heck of a deal, Andy.
$1. It's like one, because I said
that sounds. Andy, I must say that sounds like an illegal recruiting inducement.
I'd say, well, yeah. I used to say a cup of coffee a month, but now for the price of one latte, you get half a year.
If you accept this deal, don't tell anyone about it, because
if you get a large with like an extra shot,
yes,
you get half a year.
That's pretty good.
Come on.
That's pretty good. And lots of other stuff, Andy. Whatever you care about, I'm sure we're writing about it somewhere.
You can listen to this ad free if you wanted to, but
you can
listen to the ads. We like those guys.
They're great ads.
They're
Andy puts a lot of time and effort into those live rates.
Yes, I read them very dramatically. So, but yes, theathletic.com/Andy Staples, $1 a month for the first 6 months. You get incredible stories by people like David Ubben, and we cover all the sports too. So if you love international soccer, the NBA, NFL,
soccer,
MMA, if MLB ever comes back,
NASCAR, all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantasy sports. We have good fantasy sports writers, Andy.
Yes, we do. And if we're dabbling in the gambling too.
A little bit. James Holzhauer's writing stuff for us. Jeopardy whiz. It's fantastic. Listen, legit. I say this, Andy, like legitimately. Like, if I didn't work here, you still have to subscribe to The Athletic. I get a free subscription. That's part of the boost. But
I was a customer when I was working for SI and was very jealous of you guys. Like, I go read one of your stories in the app, and I'm like, wow, there's 0 ads embedded in this story.
Clean experience.
And I have 33 embedded in mine.
Clean experience, and football team Andy unrivaled. So it's fantastic.
It is amazing. End of plug. But do read David Ubben's story on
Thank you, Eddie.
NIL.
I agree.
Spire.
People should read the story. I've thought this all day.
It's very educational.
I think so.
Thank you, David.
Appreciate it.